What is the difference between boku and ore? And what is the difference between watashi and atashi? Why is jibun sometimes translated as I and sometimes translated as you? I'm going to cover 15 basic Japanese pronouns in this video to hopefully clear up some of the confusion for you anime fans out there and general learners of the Japanese language as well. So let's start with watashi. That is probably the very first personal pronoun you learn for the word I or me. Watashi is very generic, but it is also slightly feminine. So if you are a grown man, you're only really going to use watashi if you're trying to be very formal. If you're a boy, you would only really use watashi like in a formal speech, or maybe if you're trying to just be extra like official and polite. It's more than just polite. It kind of has this like literary sort of feel to it, where you would almost sound kind of like a narrator of a book or something if you're going to use that if you're a man. But for a woman, watashi is a very common way of saying I or me. So an example of an anime character that uses watashi that is a man is Hotohori from Fushigi Yugi, and he was a very regal emperor. When in doubt, you can always get away with using watashi in a conversation, but people might look at you kind of strange if you're a guy. Next up, we have atashi, which is the definitely feminine version of watashi. The only men or boys who would use atashi are femme boys, or non-femme boys being kind of homophobic and making fun of femboys. It is also the personal pronoun that I used when I was in Japan, even though in retrospect it kind of doesn't suit my personality. I'm not exactly an atashi kind of girl. Atashi is more for girly girls. I'm not really a girly girl. I wasn't really a girly girl back then either. So that's atashi. If you are an anime fan, you probably have gleaned from context that ore is a masculine version of I or me. If you are a naturally masculine kind of guy, you can use ore and no one will really think anything of it. But if you are a softer speaking kind of man, or if you're a foreigner, I think you might get some looks using ore. It's kind of like if you're not the kind of person who would say, dude, or hey man, that's awesome. And then you say, dude, or hey man, that's awesome. And you're just not that kind of person. It might get some looks. People might think, you're trying just a little too hard. But that's kind of what ore is like. It's a little rougher. It's a little more masculine. And girls can use this as well, but usually it is sort of in a silly, joking manner, or if the girl really identifies as male or somewhat masculine. Now, at this point, I should point out that one really cool thing about Japanese personal pronouns being gendered and non-gendered is that the speaker has control over their own gendered pronouns. Gendered pronouns, namely he and her and she and his and they and them and z and zer, they're in our discourse right now. A lot of people are talking about that and how to appropriately ask someone for their pronouns, how to go about, calling somebody by the correct pronouns. But the really cool thing about the Japanese language is I can telegraph to you what I want my pronouns to be by simply using the personal pronoun that matches my gender identity. So that is one really cool thing about all these gendered pronouns. I digress. Back to the list. Next gendered male pronoun is boku, and boku is very complex. It's very fascinating. It is technically the masculine form for I or me, but it is definitely the softer and younger version of I, me for boys. If you're a little boy, very common to use boku. And if you're a teenage boy and you use boku, some of the cooler guys who use ore will probably make fun of you for using boku. Boku can also be what you would call a little boy. Like if I saw a little boy who's like maybe 5 years old and he's kind of squatting on the ground and he's crying, I might go up to him and say, "Doushita no boku?" Which means, what's wrong, little boy? And boku can also be used as sort of a soft narration kind of I. You'll notice that Hamasaki Ayumi started using it a lot in her music with the album I Am. She started adopting the boku pronoun. She's not a boy, she doesn't identify as male or masculine, but she uses boku just the same because it is this softer, in a way, gender neutral version of I when coming from her in those songs. Another anime character who is female but uses boku as personal pronoun is Lime from the Saber Marionette series. Boku is pretty complex. If you are female identifying, I wouldn't use it in Japan because it will kind of sound out of place. And now on to a personal pronoun that started to gain popularity when I was in Japan about 15 years ago, and that's uchi. Now, uchi actually is Kansai-ben for I or me, but it spread all the way up to the Tohoku region where I was living. It is kind of like Atashi. It's a very kind of girly girl, at least the way it is used, not in the Kansai region. It is a very girly girl. It's kind of like the kind of girl who'd be so I was gonna go to the mall with my friends. It has a very, not only girly girl, but a very like contemporary girly girl vibe to it. But the other way that uchi can be used as a personal pronoun is it can be used kind of as a collective personal pronoun. When you use uchi that way, it can mean like my household or the people in my family or at home. And uchi can also mean like your business, your company. If you're referring to if you want to give like your company or your house a personal pronoun of I or me, or your family a personal pronoun of I or me, you would maybe use uchi. Now we're going to get into the more esoteric, old-timey personal pronouns. You'll see anime characters using these a lot because anime characters are larger than life. People in real life don't really use these pronouns unless they're being really silly. The first one we have is oira. I actually heard a couple girls in my class in Japan using oira from time to time. It's kind of an old-timey hick way of saying me. Chichiri from Fushigi Yugi uses oira. If you want an example of a kind of character that would use oira. And yeah, the girls who were using oira in my class were being silly. Then you have ware. That is a very regal sort of version for I or me. If you are an emperor or a god or something, then you might say ware. So in a lot of like historical anime or fictitious fantasy sort of anime, you might find characters that use ware. Watakushi is the original version of watashi. They just shortened it to Watashi from Watakushi. So Watakushi is more like if you're an ojo-sama, if you're like this rich lady, you might use Watakushi. I have never heard an actual woman, and I've met ojo-sama, I've met like rich women in Japan, and none of them use Watakushi that I can recall. But often if you have like the rich lady, the rich bitch character in an anime series, she'll use Watakushi.
私、母と子の教育被害を考える会会長の大田が授業を視察させていただきたいと。
It's a very pompous, very feminine kind of darling personal pronoun. Here is a personal pronoun that I've only seen come up a couple times, and that's shosei. It's kind of an old-timey samurai kind of way of saying I. A notable anime character that uses shosei is, what was her name? God, what was her name? Mitsudomoe Futaba, right? Hitoha, Futaba, and Mitsuba? It was Futaba from the anime series Mitsudomoe. And that girl is pretty weird. So kind of makes sense that she would use shosei, this very outdated, archaic, esoteric word for I and me. Aside from futaba, I've only really seen it come up a couple times in period pieces that I've translated, like a guard might use shosei. Otherwise, I've never heard anyone actually use that in daily conversation. Another outdated samurai kind of way of saying I or me is sessha. And the only time I think I've ever seen this come up, aside from, once again, period pieces, was the manga series Appare Jipangu by Wataseyu, the author of Ayashi no Seres, Shigiyugi, Arata Kangatari, and others. This character was a very, noble sort of samurai character, so he used sessha. Or was that Kazanosuke? God, it's been a long time since I read that series. It was either Samon or Kazanosuke. I don't remember. And now we're moving on to waga. This is a very regal, very divine, godly way of saying my. A very common phrase is something like waga sugata, which means the way I look or my form, the form that I take. But yeah, not used in daily conversation. And now we're on to some personal pronouns that can mean me and I, but they can also mean you, and they can also mean one. Kind of like waga, only even more so. So the first one that I brought up at the very beginning of the video is jibun. So if you are a very astute anime viewer and you are listening while you're reading the subtitles, you may have noticed that sometimes when a character says jibun, they say you or your blah 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 blah. And sometimes if they say jibun, they're saying me or my blah blah blah. So you're wondering, wait a minute, was one of those incorrect? Like, when does jibun mean my and when does it mean your? And the answer is it kind of means both, because it means one. Okay, if I'm about to kokuhaku, or confess my love to my senpai, I might say something like jibun no kimochi o kakusenai, which means like I can't hide my own feelings anymore. But if I'm talking about my senpai to a third party and I'm saying kare wa jibun no kimochi ni shoujiki dewa nai, I'm saying he is not honest with his own feelings. So it basically becomes the personal pronoun of the subject of the sentence that you're talking about, or the topic of the sentence that you're talking about. I know when a lot of people say the subject of a Japanese sentence, you have to use the particle ga, but I'm talking about the subject at large of the sentence. The object, I guess. So another version of jibun that is rough and very rude is teme. This is basically the same thing as jibun. If I did that example to the third party about senpai and say senpai wa teme no kimochi ni shoujiki janai zo, it'd be like, that surly cur, that cad, that bastard, he is not honest with his feelings. And you probably have most often heard teme as this sort of accusatory teme, which is like damn you or you bastard. It really just means you, or more officially so, one. Ambiguous personal pronoun for topic of sentence. Another spin-off of the jibun teme thing is onore. And it is pretty much the exact same thing as teme, just a different word, onore. So the very last personal pronoun that you can use, and I like this about Japanese too, you can just use your own name as your own personal pronoun. So instead of saying, I like cats, I could say, Sarah likes cats. If I were to say that in English, if I were to talk about myself in the third person in English, it would sound kind of sing-songy and weird. It's like that Seinfeld episode where there was that guy who like always referred to himself in the third person and everyone thought he was psycho.
George is getting upset!
It does have a little bit of that to it in Japanese. There is a hint of the, oh, you're kind of sing-songy cutesy if you use your own name as a personal pronoun. But it's not quite as weird as it is in English to use your own name as a personal pronoun. A really cool thing you can do if you're like in a new situation and you're pretty sure nobody knows your name, but you want to help them save face by teaching them your name without explicitly having to be like, hey, my name is Sarah. I can just say a sentence like, Sarah loves this shirt that she got at a thrift store. Or Sarah has a Patreon and you could become a patron for as little as $1 a month. And you can also use a name as a personal pronoun for you, which is incredibly common. That is not at all sing-songy or weird. Like if your name were Bob and I were asking you if you wanted a cup of coffee, it is not unusual for me to say, would Bob like a cup of coffee instead of would you like a cup of coffee? That can get really annoying with translating because sometimes it's just a lot cleaner and makes a lot more sense in the translation to replace the person's name with I or me or you. But then if you use I, me, or you, but you can hear with your ears that character's name in the dialogue, you think that it's a mistranslation, but it isn't really. So that was my crash course in 15 personal pronouns. Let me know in the comments which personal pronoun you think you would use if you were Japanese. I'm just boring old Watashi. Mata ne! Hi, thanks for watching. watching that video. If you want to support me for free, like, comment, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. You can also add me on the Facebook or the Twitter. Or you can head over to my Etsy shop where I have Sailor Moon, Ai no Minako, and all sorts of other amigurumi for sale. If you're feeling even more generous, I have a Patreon now. For just $1 or $2 a month, you can get special perks like your name in the credits, or a secret monthly video. Or you could just binge watch all my videos to the end, trick the almighty algorithm into thinking that I'm popular. Do it for the kitties! Bye!